The power the Dark Lord knows not. It could mean anything, James mused, rubbing his chin with a speculative look on his face. Lily had not stopped pacing, her mind racing on possible ways she could get her family out of this disaster. The war was bearing down on all of them, and now with this stupid prophecy, it seemed that things would be getting much, much worse. I believe that it is love. Dumbledore butted in, his eyes twinkling. Lily just scoffed. You'll forgive me if I don't want to rest my son's survival on love. Lily Evans Potter looked down at the simmering cauldron. It was nearing its completion, though she was still worried that she would mess it up, and then her son would be doomed should the worst happen. Over the past month, she had spent very little time with her husband, who seemed not to share her concerns over the power the Dark Lord knew not. She had spent nearly all of this time in her private quarters, of where she had not allowed James to enter. He could not know of the potion she was crafting. He would not understand. With a shaky breath, Lily dribbled the acquired blood into the cauldron. It had not been easy to find, but she had gotten lucky during her search and had found a sample kept preserved for centuries. Once the blood had been added, there was a series of color changes before it settled on a viscous purple. Lily sighed in relief, having not known if her calculations would result in a success. The potion in question was not something she had created based on a standard recipe. It was, in fact, a homebrew recipe based on incomplete notes she had found in the Black Library. Lily looked down at the ritual circle she had spent the past few weeks drawing. It was done entirely in her blood, and the rune schemes had also been of her own design with the help of Arcturus Black VI. The potion was, of course, only the precursor to the final bit of magic that would allow her child to bear the powers of a dangerous magical creature. The brew would be fed directly to young Harry Potter, and the ritual was designed to merge his genes with that of the magical creature using blood alchemy. He would be the first bioengineered magical child in existence. With a final deep breath, she incanted the activation phrase, and the magic around her reacted to the code word. The heavy presence in the air weighed down on her then, and she saw the candles flicker once again before a small orb appeared around 5 feet above her. It pulsed, sending a ripple of invisible magic outwards. She shuddered when it touched her, but the pulses only became more violent as the ritual entered into its beginning phase. The red orb continued to grow, expanding outwards until it was the size of a bludger. Then it stopped, and everything was silent. The magic, however, was still oppressive, and she knew that things would only worsen from here. After a little while, the next phase began. Without any warning, a red light shot out from the bludger-sized orb and impacted against one of the blood phylacteries. Lily heard an inhuman wail as the blood sacrifice was taken from the crystal and absorbed into the growing sphere of energy. This happened 3 more times, the oppressive atmosphere growing as more lives were consumed by the foul magic she had evoked to protect her son. When the pulsing had stopped, she was grabbed by invisible hands and made to lie down on her back with her arms and legs spread in a snow angel position. The crimson orb shot out another lance of magic that pierced her belly, causing Lily to let out a scream of pain. Her screams were, however, drowned out by the intense magic. The only reason she wasn't freaking out over her baby was because she had not designed the ritual to hurt him. Right now, it was merging his genetic code with that of the creature and writing the parameters she had constructed into his DNA. This process took a few minutes, and by the time it had finished, James had returned with Dumbledore. However, neither of them was able to break through the shimmering barrier around the circle. When the ritual had finished making alterations to her unborn child, the beam of light vanished, leaving behind no trace of any injuries. Mrs. Potter, you made us both very scared. Do you mind explaining what this is all about? He asked softly, blue eyes piercing into her own. She felt a light probe at her occlumency. Lily shut him out, sending the old headmaster a chilly glare. I was assuring my son's future, she said icily, not willing to back down. James gave her an odd look. Lily. Assuring it how? Dumbledore probed, sending out another legilimency strike. This one was more urgent, but she crushed it all the same. Stay the fuck out of my mind! She snapped, her pregnancy not helping her temper any. James shot Dumbledore a stern look before turning back to her. Lily, what did you do? He asked in a weak, almost betrayed voice. She hated how much she had hurt him. I gave our son a power that will protect him should Lord Voldemort kill both of us, she answered, still not saying exactly what she had done. What did you do to my sister? Vernon roared, his face purple and spittle flying from his mouth. Harry could hear Petunia fussing over Marge, who was letting out pathetic noises as she tried and failed to speak. He had not meant to do it. Really, he hadn't. But the woman had started saying some really nasty things about his parents, and his mother in particular. While she had been speaking, Harry had thrust out his hand, which had caused a sickly yellow light to shoot from his fingers. It had impacted Marge, sealing her lips together and vanishing her mouth. The sight was ghastly, but he barely had any time to observe his efforts when Vernon had assaulted him. Reverse it now, Vernon shouted in his face. Harry had backed away slowly, crawling until he was pressed against the wall. But his uncle was having none of it. He left and returned with a baseball bat. You're going to tell me, or I'm going to bash your skull in, he threatened. He made to swing, but at that moment, Harry felt something explode in his chest. An animalistic scream was torn from his throat as he felt pain unlike anything he'd ever felt before. Petunia watched as Harry's eyes turned black, and he screamed. It was an unholy sound, and everyone in the room covered their ears as the noise tore through the living room, making the furniture shudder and the windows shatter. When it was over, her ears were ringing. Petunia was still holding on to her son, who was pressed into her chest. When she looked up, she saw that her husband had been blasted backwards. His large body had impacted against a cabinet, breaking it. He was just lying there, unmoving. But the thing that made her gasp was what had replaced her nephew. Where Harry had once been was now a black cocoon. It stood at 6 feet and was double the length of Harry's body. It was completely black from top to bottom, but that wasn't what made her feel terror. Rather, it was that the cocoon was writhing. It started off twitching a little, but over time it began to jerk around. Marge's pit bull was very agitated and was growling at the abomination, straining at its leash and trying to chew through the fabric. Her sister-in-law had scurried back until she was at the far end of the room, hiding behind the television where she stared intensely at the cocoon. There was a sickening squelch, and she saw a black finger poke through the edge of the cocoon, which had stopped writhing. Harry Potter emerged, though there was something wrong with him. He opened his eyes, which had remained green. Now, though, they were cold. He was also missing his glasses, which she noted had been tossed aside carelessly. He peered around the room, analyzing everyone with the look of a predator as he assessed the situation. Petunia watched him, flinching when their eyes met briefly. "What happened, Vernon?" he asked in a cruel voice. He sounded amused, and it sent shivers down her spine. Vernon stopped trying to pick himself up and just glared up at him with beady eyes. "Get out of my house!" he hissed, sounding pained. Petunia feared he might have broken something, and she hoped that it was not his back. Then, to everyone's combined horror, Harry's body began to sprout appendages. There were 8 of them in total, each coming out of his back. His lips curved upwards as her husband squirmed, moving bloody hands around on the floor as he tried in vain to crawl away. One of the appendages picked him up by the throat before expanding. It was long, hairy and black, and Harry was easily able to hold him despite their differences in size. "Please, have mercy on us," Petunia pleaded. Harry then turned towards her, and she had to fight not to avert her eyes. There wasn't an ounce of humanity in his desolate green orbs. "That remains to be seen," he said before advancing on Vernon. She caught sight of his back, which had an oddly familiar symbol on it. His clothes were still there, but they looked like they'd been torn. Harry's body looked to be much more muscular as a whole. In the center of his back was a tattoo in a deep crimson color, and it crudely represented an hourglass. "Redback spider," she whispered quietly, horrified by what she was seeing.